This is the hour we stand. This is the hour we fight. Not the hour for cowards. Time to fight for our rights. And I ain't running no more. I'm standing 10 toes down. Too much at stake right now. Except for blood in the ground. Pick a side. No more. Straddling the fist. You either hot or cold. You either bashful or bold. Brother Cliff, BVM. Best believe that I've been listening. The rebirth of a movement. Black power. Revisit. Black power. We back. You either lion or lamb. Black power. We back. You either foe or fam. Black power. We back. Make sure that you're listening. Black power. We back. Black power. Revisited. What?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day you're listening, and wherever you may be, welcome to Black Power Revisited. I'm your host, Cliff Albright, co-founder, executive director, Black Voters Matter, and I know what you're thinking. Why is the podcast called Black Power Revisited? What's that all about? Well, let me tell you. Some of you may know, some of you may remember the phrase Black Power originated in the 1960s, coined originally by SNCC leaders like Stokely Carmichael and Willie Ricks, later to be known as Kwame Ture and Mukasa Dada, respectively. But that they coined the phrase, they talked about it, they organized around it. Later on, it became associated with organizations like the Black Panther Party, in fact, an entire Black Power movement. But then what happened? Right. In the decades that followed, we started to talk less and less about Black Power. We got a little uncomfortable with it. Right. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Part of it is because the way that it was presented in the media, the way that it was attacked by the government and the FBI and COINTELPRO, the way that it's been presented in history books and elsewhere. In fact, just last year at the funeral for Congressman John Lewis, here comes Bill Clinton coming all out his mouth and having the nerve to take a swipe at Black Power implicitly by taking a swipe at Stokely Carmichael, saying there was a while there, quote, when the movement went a little too far towards Stokely. That's the kind of thing that we've been dealing with. And so here we are now, wanting to have some conversations. And part of what I want to do with this podcast is to have conversations with leaders, predominantly Black leaders in predominantly Black communities, people who are working every day towards Black Power, towards strengthening our communities. And so having these conversations to see, what does Black Power mean to you? What does it look like? How are you working towards it? And perhaps most importantly, how will we know when we've gotten there? Right. And so part of what we want to do by having those conversations is to redefine, or at least to get our communities to feel comfortable with the notion of Black Power, to feel comfortable with having these conversations and not viewing it as something that's taboo or something that's threatening or something that's a dirty word. You know, sometimes in our communities, we might get comfortable saying Black and we might get comfortable talking about power, but then you try to put in those two things together, Black Power, and now folks are whispering, right? It's something that we don't really want to talk about. We got to get over that. And the only way to do that is by having these conversations. And in so doing, being able to recognize, as Dr. King once said, that power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. Which brings us to today's guest, a mayor who was recently elected in large part because of a movement to redefine what justice looks like. I'm so excited on our inaugural episode to be able to be joined by none other than the first Black female mayor of the great city of St. Louis, Missouri, Mayor Tishaura Jones. Mayor, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
All right. I'm so excited about this. I'm such a huge fan of your work, and we've got some common friends there in St. Louis. But before we get into, mayor and the political and all that, let's just go back to the beginning, right? I always like to ask people about like how they got on this path of being involved in whatever it is, whether it's social justice, community service, building power in some way or another. There's so many different entry points. Some people are joined into social justice and movement. Some people just came across it 3 or 4 years ago, right? And so what was your path? What was the moment where you kind of said to yourself, you know what, I think I want to be in the business of helping to strengthen our community?
Well, many may think that this is something I've always wanted to do because my father was in politics, but I shied away from politics for most of my adult life because, a lot of times us as children don't want to follow in the footsteps of our parents. So I went a totally different direction, and I had a master. I majored in finance at Hampton University and went to work in investment banks, and then I went back to school for my master's in health administration and was totally cool with my career in health administration, working in community health centers, still service related, but in a different way. And then, my mother always says the quickest way to make God laugh is to tell him what you would never do. And so I told the universe I would never go into politics. And God tapped me on the shoulder one day and said, sister, I think you need to, this is your calling. And I entered politics as a committee woman and ran for state rep in 2008 as a single mom. I thought that also when I was about to become a mom, that was a sign that I shouldn't go into politics. And God was like, no, this is going to be your testimony and your reason for going into politics. And I had my son and launched my first race when he was 3 months old for state rep, and have always experienced politics or paid politics as a single parent. And spent 2 years in the state house, was then again tapped to run for treasurer in the city of St. Louis by my good friend who's now the head of the Urban League, Michael McMillan. And the rest, they say, is history. I spent 2 terms in the treasurer's office, ran for mayor once and didn't make it, and came back and ran again. And now here I am.
That's right. Here you are. Well, let's talk a little bit about that first, or not first service, but that previous service, right? As treasurer. Obviously, as you said, prior to running for mayor, you served as treasurer. And that's always struck me as an interesting position because, we often talk about, in our community, we talk about like, what's the path we need to be following to strengthen our community, to build power? Is it building economic power? Is it building political power? And, certain positions like treasurer, it seems to be like kind of at that intersection, right? Between of those two strategies. Can you talk for a minute about like the way you see that balancing act between, our efforts to build political power and our efforts to deal and to build economic power?
Yes, absolutely. So when I ran for treasurer in 2012, I ran on a platform of financial empowerment for underserved communities. And so I looked at the treasurer's job description being that of the chief investment and banking officer for the city, and decided that I was going to leverage that position to bring more resources, more financial empowerment resources to our community, and to use it as a way to try to hold banks accountable for for the Community Reinvestment Act, which was passed by Congress many, many years ago. And so I started down that pathway, opened an Office of Financial Empowerment in City Hall, and then started various programs to help get our people free, financially free. So we, to this day, still help people improve their credit scores for free. And through full-time counseling, full-time counselor on staff. We also have a large program that helps children and families increase their financial capabilities. It's called College Kids, and it provides a $50 savings account to every kindergarten student entering a public school in the city of St. Louis. It has over 18,000 children in the program to date, with over $1.5 million saved for their futures. And we started this program because children with less than $500 saved are 3 times more likely to go to college and 4 times more likely to complete college than children without savings. And we all know that 2/3 of the jobs of the future are going to require some sort of post-secondary education. So it was important to me to get our children started on a path early. And then also help them with these accounts as they matriculate through school, because these accounts grow because we contribute to it when they or their families do good things like good attendance, match savings, and parents' participation in financial education courses. So anecdotally, we've seen them opening accounts for themselves or their other children in their family, and also using the services and classes that we provide to refinance existing debt, to finance new purchases of homes or cars, and fix their own credit. So it's working.
So I really need to, I need to go back a second. I need you to repeat what you said. You said to every child, say it again, every child entering
a public school in the city of St. Louis gets an account open in their name, and we loaded the first $50. Now, here's the tricky part. So the treasurer is also the parking supervisor for the city of St. Louis. And so the money that goes into that program comes from parking revenue. So anytime somebody pays a parking ticket or feeds a meter or parks in a city-owned garage, they are contributing to that program.
Look at that. And then that's recirculating, right? That's recirculating in the community. And like you said, it goes into savings and at some point can be invested towards something that truly is right at the intersection of political power and economic power. I love that. Thank you so much for that. So let's fast forward a little bit. So you're serving as treasurer. You decide to run for mayor back in 2017. Obviously a contentious campaign, and there came a point where you wound up writing a letter to the newspaper, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Directly to the editorial board because of the type of coverage that they were giving. And they received national attention. At one point, I think you referred to it as kind of like a Fannie Lou Hamer moment. Talk a little bit about that moment, what led to it. What was the issue that was driving you being led to write that letter? And looking back, what does that moment mean?
So in the days leading up to the date that should have been my interview with the editorial board, I was going back and forth with my campaign staff, with my father, who's a campaign advisor of mine, and telling them, no, I am not going to interview with the editorial board. And they were like, oh my God, you're crazy. Nobody turns down the editorial board. And I said, watch me. I'm not going to interview with the editorial board. And so we kept going back and forth. And I knew that I did not want to be a part of the self-fulfilling prophecy. I knew that they weren't going to endorse me. I knew that they were going to take this opportunity to berate me in person. And I'm setting boundaries, right? And I also, I was like, no, I'm just not going to do it. So the morning of the interview, I'm getting my son ready for school. He was about 9 or 10 years old at the time. And and again, my staff and I are going back and forth via text and email. And I had what I now think was almost a nervous breakdown. And my son, it scared the mess out of my son. And so he called my dad, who lives across the street, and said, hey, you need to get over here. Mommy's just like, she's going out. She's out of control. And and he came over, and then he was like, no, okay, I hear you. We're not going to do this. And so the letter was my prepared remarks for the editorial board. And so it became a letter instead, and we decided to publish it on the St. Louis American's website, which is the leading Black paper here in the St. Louis region. It's our Black Weekly. And I also, at that point, I felt like, I wasn't showing up as my authentic self in the race at that time. Not that, any of the things, not that I didn't believe in any of the things that I was saying. I just wasn't showing up as me. I just felt like a talking head. And I said, we really need to talk about what's really going on here. The veiled racist statements that this editorial board is making, like bringing down the high-flying treasurer. She needs to be brought down as though I'm uppity, right? And, all of the other crazy things that they said about me. And I said, we're going to call them out on their racism. And we're going to let everybody know about it. This is not normal. This is not normal, because not only do they do it to me, they do it to every Black female elected official in this town.
Right. There's so much that you just said that is so rich. And from being at the point of what you now looking back think may have been a nervous breakdown, but even, talking about the issues that led to that, we always talk about intersection intersectionality. It's hard enough to run for office, right? It's hard to run for office and you're Black. It's even harder to run for office and you're Black and you're a woman, right? Because that plays into that whole high flying and all that stuff. And so, it's just but that last part of what you said about feeling like you weren't being your authentic self, right? Because a lot of times what we see in candidates is this need to kind of play the respectability politics game, right? That there's some things that you're expected to say. There's some things that you're expected to not say. There's some issues that you can't even really touch. And part of what we've found, in my the other hat I wear with Black Voters Matter is we always say we've got to communicate with our community in a way that's authentic, right? Or else we can't get them to respond or to turn out in the numbers that we expect them to see, So when you flip that switch, right, when you finally felt the space or were pushed into a space in some sense where you just decided I'm gonna just be me, right? Did you sense a different response from people, from you communicating in a different, more straightforward kind of way, from being more authentically you? Did you sense some kind of response from folks that you would talk to after that point?
Absolutely. I felt like how I felt I wasn't showing up in my authentic way. I felt like other people were looking for someone authentic to support. Mm-hmm. All of the candidates were pretty much saying the same thing, but in a different way. And I broke out of the pack because I decided to call a spade a spade. We have to talk about the racism that's in this town. We have to talk about the racism that permeates every institution and every policy and every decision made, and how it affects people of color in this town. And because I decided to break away and be honest about it, right? I'm like, let's have the truth and reconciliation conversation, right? Because we have to tell the truth. I felt like that was the moment that propelled my campaign to be able to come within 888 votes shy of winning, and only spending a third of what the winning candidates spent.
Mm-hmm. Right. Let's talk about the more recent campaign, right? And some of the same issues were showing up in the more recent one too, right? Just because you're a second time candidate don't make you exempt from sexism and racism. And so, and I know you could probably give a bunch of examples, and please feel free to. But there was one that I came across at one point during the recent campaign where your opponent was basically using the old trope, the old theme of if you elect you, right, if folks elect you, that the city's going to go down the drain, right? That wasn't her exact words, but that was the gist of it, right? That businesses are going to leave and crime's going to go, just this sense that the city's just going to fall apart if we have this Black leadership, this Black woman's leadership. Talk to me a little bit about like that, or it doesn't even have to be that specific example, but like just some of the ways that you were hearing and seeing these things, whether it's from your opponent or from the media, right, as it was in the previous election, but just that theme of, this constantly doubting and planting these seeds of distrust in Black leadership.
Right. Or how they blow dog whistles, right? That was clear. So when my then opponent said that she was afraid that St. Louis could become East St. Louis. And for your listeners, East St. Louis is just across the river from St. Louis. It was once a bustling metropolis, but however, it is the victim of white flight and de-annexing, because we have to know the history. And also, East St. Louis is the place of the East St. Louis race riots. We all know about Tulsa, but East St. Louis happened in 1917. And so I am a firm believer that you have to know your history before you open your mouth. There's one of the statements I live by, and I don't know if this was Mark Twain or Abraham Lincoln, one of them, Is it better to remain silent and have people think you're a fool than to speak and remove all doubt? And my opponent spoke and talked about how she was afraid that St. Louis could become East St. Louis. And the reference she had was her mother, whose parents moved away, who flew when she was 12 years old. And now my grandparents lived in East St. Louis until they died, and I still have a ton of family that still lives there. My grandfather, who was a union painter living in St. Louis, could not get a job in his trained field as a union painter until East St. Louis elected its first Black mayor in 1968. And then my grandfather moved his family to East St. Louis, got a good paying job almost until he died, and was able to buy his first home to participate in the American dream, because he couldn't do it over here in St. Louis because nobody would hire. And saying that St. Louis could become East St. Louis because of the leadership that was there, right? And we know that what that dog whistle is about. I was offended by that, and I called her out on it. And instead of recognizing the racist dog whistle that she used, she instead doubled down on that rhetoric and accused me of phony outrage. And that's just one of several examples that happened during the last race. But it was an eye-opening moment for a lot of people who were supporting her, who thought that was not that move was not very tasteful.
Mm-hmm. So it's always interesting when like some of these candidates, they show their true colors, no pun intended, but they show their racial bias or whatever, and you get people like it happened with Trump, right? Like you had people talking about, after he got elected and after talking about Mexicans, this and that, and immigrants, and after Charlottesville, even saying, "Oh my God, this wasn't the Trump that I've known for so long." No, it was the same person, right? Right. Right. So it's always amazing how people are like, "I'm shocked to discover that you got some prejudices or whatever." So.
I'm sorry. Campaigns have the ability to show who you really are, right?
That's right.
And power does that too, and money does that. That's right. The old statement that absolute power corrupts absolutely. This was one of those revealing moments for my opponent.
That's true. That's right. And even the quest for power, right? The path to power will reveal a lot about you too. That's very insightful. So there's this question over, leadership, as you say, and, a big part of how after elections we view leadership is like, to what extent folks are accountable, like to what extent folks do what they said they were going to do. Right. And, you ran a campaign too, really, talking about this issue of police accountability, talking about changing the way that we even perceive the issue of public safety, right? Because we've come in this country to equate policing, some folks, to equate policing with safety, as if we can't have safety without policing or without massive levels of policing, right? And so part of the discussion is about redefining public safety and just thinking about it in a different kind of way. But you come into office and you proposed a budget that cuts the police budget by $4 million, consistent with what you ran on, consistent with what some might say the view is, the overall messaging of defunding the police or reimagining policing, but consistent with what you ran on, right? Talk a little bit about like why that's so important. Like what's your vision of what that reimagining, that reallocation, like why is that so important?
Because we have to reimagine what public safety is and what it is not. And in my opinion, public safety is what keeps you safe in your homes and in your neighborhoods. Housing, access to affordable housing is public safety. Access to mental health and substance abuse services is public safety. And so we cut $4 million out of vacant positions that have gone unfilled for decades, and used $4 million out of a $171 million budget, I might add, to invest in things that will keep people safe. So we will be able to hire some upwards of 15 to 20 social workers, and also put more money into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which helps our unhoused as well as helps build and repair affordable housing units in the city of St. Louis. And I did that because our officers are exhausted. You know, the moves that I'm making is not in any way demonizing the police or having them lose their jobs. These are vacant positions, so no one will lose their current job if they are an officer. And I have been accused of, like I said, demonizing the police and not respecting the police. But mutual respect goes both ways. And our Police Officers Association, through some of their spokespeople, have been disrespecting the community for years. And so we have to reset that relationship. And the way that we do that is by giving them help. Giving our officers help, because they are exhausted, because they are called for everything. And they are often not equipped to handle some of the calls that they go on when someone dials 911. And sometimes when they aren't equipped to handle those situations, we get bad results and outcomes. That's how we have people like Kajimi Powell, who was having a mental health breakdown and had a knife in his hand and was killed within seconds of officers getting on the scene of where he was. You know, and the name, that's our local example, but I'm sure that there are many, many examples across this country where people who needed the help of a mental health professional, but instead received an officer who wasn't equipped to handle that situation. And unfortunately, they lost their lives. You should not lose your life for calling for help. Or you shouldn't lose your life if somebody calls for help for you. So we can't reform our way out of this. We have to transform it. We have to transform it by deploying the right professional to the right call.
Yeah, you know, since you say about how we can't reform our way out of this, I retweeted, somebody posted the other day, it was a newspaper cartoon literally from 18 something, like 1880s. And it was in the cartoon, it said, and it was a police officer, billy club, beating up somebody. And the caption to this cartoon said something to the effect of, you know, the only way that you can prove the police officer beat you over the head with the club or whatever is if you photograph them, right? And this was in the early age of photography. But I'm like, my, oh my, this is like, we are literally still fighting the same issues. But there's still this notion that you can just reform your way out of that, you know, and it's just kind of mind boggling.
Yeah, we can't. We have to transform the way in which we deliver services. It's using an outdated model when it comes to policing as well in our communities. Mm-hmm. That outdated model was born out of the slave patrols.
That's right. Yep. That's right.
We need a new model when it comes to public safety, just like we upgrade our old systems within other departments of city government. It's time to do the same in public safety, and not just the software we use, but how we respond.
Mm-hmm. I wasn't originally going to ask this, but I'm just reflecting on it as we're talking. You're in St. Louis. You're in arguably in the space or in the area where you can say Black Lives Matter was born, right? Like the pain of Ferguson, right? The trauma of Ferguson, and yet here we are 7 years later, and new DA. Cori Bush is in Congress, right? You're the mayor. Like, do you ever just wake up and be like, wow, like just reflecting on from where this came to where it's gone?
Yeah, absolutely. And the funny thing was, Corey, our circuit attorney, Kim Gardner, and myself were all on the ballot at the same time when I ran for re-election as treasurer in August. Mm-hmm. And we would often send each other like text messages or calls of encouragement. We were counting down the days, like, sis, 5 more days, sis, 3 more days. But 2 weeks before, I sent Corey a text, or I might have called her, and I said, sis, do you realize what might happen? I said, what if all 3 of us win in a couple of weeks? What if that happens? And I was like, oh my God, the ground is going to shake. It's going to seismic shift. Right. And it happened. I guess right. I was speaking it into existence, right?
That's right. That's right.
But what we need to do now that I'm mayor, within my first 5 days in office, we were in our jails. Corey, Kim, and I were in our jails, talking to our detainees, seeing the conditions that they're being kept in up front and personal, and then letting them know that we care. And I have pledged to close one of the jails and consolidate our prisoners into one jail, but also make sure that they're being treated with dignity and respect. They are all detainees because they have not yet had their day in court. And so it is my responsibility to take care of them while they are waiting for their day in court. And I'm going to use that word care, right? We shouldn't be holding them like rats in cages. And of course, the court systems are backed up due to COVID. We know that jury trials are far and few between, and they're waiting for their day in court. But that doesn't mean that we have to treat them like animals in cages. We can still provide rehabilitative services. We can provide them access to books and to law libraries so they can do research on their own cases. We can provide them access to fresh food and vegetables. We can make sure that their areas are clean and safe, and have fresh running water. These are some of the conditions that they're being held in now, and that's not acceptable under my watch.
Say that. That's right. Go ahead. This has been great. We're just about at time. I got one last question. You may, in fact, have just answered it, because I think that vision that you just laid out, that's a powerful vision. But the question I was going to ask is, out of all your goals, all your policy priorities and everything, if you were able to answer like in one sentence, maybe 2, I'll let you have 2. If you were to answer, 4 years from now, at the end of your first term, or we'll say 8 at the end of your second, but like, what would it look like? What would be the thing that would make you wake up that morning and be like, we did that? Like, like you said, we talked it into existence. Like, what would be the main thing that would let you really know that you achieved what you were hoping to achieve? I know it's a lot, but if you were able to... No,
but I thought about this. My wildest dream is to create a master plan for North St. Louis and parts of South St. Louis that haven't been invested in decades. We created that plan for downtown and for what we call the Central Corridor or Central Business District in our city. They've received all of the investment and attention. And oftentimes at the detriment of North St. Louis and parts of South St. Louis have not. So what if we reverse that and try to put all of or a good amount of attention and resources into those neighborhoods? So that would look like new housing starts for mixed income, for affordable and market rate. That would look like programs to keep those families who've been in those neighborhoods for generations in their home with the money to fix up those homes. And so they can participate in the rebirth of those neighborhoods without getting pushed out. That would look like our schools starting to reopen because we have closed several schools. That would look like our population going back on the incline instead of being on steady decline as it has been. We just got our census numbers back, and I knew that we would be under 300,000, and we were at 297 and some change. So that would look like our census estimates would say that St. Louis would go back over 300,000 in population. That would look like after school programs for our children and year round youth jobs for our kids. That would look like decreased crime or decreased violent crime in poor neighborhoods, because we know that that violent crime often happens in neighborhoods where we don't do any investment, or we don't, we just abandon these neighborhoods. And so you would see a whole host of activity in neighborhoods that haven't seen investment in decades, not only residential, but commercial investment as well.
You got me ready. You got me ready to come and help build it, to help build that vision. I'm ready. I'm so excited. You know, my favorite mayor has been Mayor Chokwe Antar Lumumba, who I'm sure you know, over in Jackson, Mississippi. I've known him for some time, but I think he got to run for his money now. I think you might be. Oh, I don't know. But thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today, for having this conversation, for all that you've been doing. I'm so excited for all that you're going to do, because I know that vision that you just laid out is going to come to pass. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And yeah, Chokwe is one of my favorite mayors too. I've been definitely following what they've been doing with the People's Assembly, and we're trying to birth something similar to make sure that people have a voice. They haven't had a voice in their government in decades. And so they're going to have a voice because, well, one of the things they call me is my nickname is the People's Mayor. That's right. So I will be the People's Mayor.
I'm excited about you about to take the interview in a whole nother direction, because you get me talking about those people's assemblies, and we have to come back and do a whole nother episode just on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Thank you again. You be safe.
You too.
And now for today's Cliff Note. As I was thinking on my conversation with Mayor Jones, and obviously the topic of criminal justice reform and police budgets and defunding the police, I had planned to do a Cliff Note that was going to talk about the upcoming anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. I had planned to do a Cliff Note that was going to talk about the ongoing police violence, including a murder that happened in Charleston, South Carolina, just a few months ago, for which there's a video. Jamal Sutherland, killed while in custody, killed while in prison on his way to a bond hearing, in a video which many people think is just as bad, if not worse even, than the George Floyd video. And so I had planned to do a Cliff Note talking about that. But even as Mayor Jones and I were concluding our discussion, the battle, the massacre that's taking place, the tragedy that is taking place in Palestine was unfolding and reaching higher levels, with rockets being launched back and forth. But the continuation of what has been called the world's largest open air prison, those are the conditions that the Palestinian people are living under. And so I thought, I can't not talk about what's going on in Palestine. But how do I do that? How do I make that choice between those two topics? But there's not a choice to be made, because in fact, they are one and the same topic. The same battles that we are fighting, that Black folks are fighting in order to demand that our lives matter, is the same battle as the Palestinians are fighting to demand that their lives matter. The same images that we see of police raiding the homes of Palestinians along with Israeli police and military and mobs are some of the same images that we've seen right here in this country of police raiding our homes. And while we're at it, say her name, Breonna Taylor, murdered inside her home as she slept. The same images that we saw after the George Floyd murder, the same images of cities under protest, cities that in some cases, yes, included some fires and included confrontations with police. Those are the same images that we see of Palestinians throwing slingshots and rocks and pebbles at the Israeli army. And so there's not a choice to be made, because in fact, in order for us to say that Black Power, or to say Black Power Revisited, we've got to recognize that these struggles are connected. We've got to recognize, in fact, it would be a dishonor to the person that I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, Kwame Ture, who coined the phrase Black Power, it would be a disservice to not recognize the lesson that he learned and to which he dedicated his life, that this is a global struggle. And so today in this Cliff Note, I'm pleased, although I wish it wasn't necessary, to connect these two struggles and to say I stand with Palestine and to say that we must end Israeli apartheid. I'm Cliff. This is my Cliff Note. Keep it tuned, y'all. Come back and check us out on future weeks of Black Power Revisited. We're going to have folks like Roland Martin, Alicia Garza, Mayor Chokwe Antar Lumumba, and many, many more. So go on, tell a friend, spread the word, like it, share it. Black Power Revisited. Y'all take care and be safe.
This is the hour we stand, this is the hour we fight. Not the hour for cowards, time to fight for our rights. And I ain't running no more, I'm standing 10 toes down. Too much at stake right now, except for blood in the ground. Pick a side, no more, straddling the fence. You either hot or cold, you either bashful or bold. Brother Cliff, BVM, best believe that I've been listening. The rebirth of a movement, Black Power, revisit. Black Power, we back, you either lion or lamb. Black Power, we back, you either foe or fam. Black Power, we back, make sure that you're listening. Black Power, we back, Black Power revisited. What?